Hello and welcome to Darryl and Company. Today as our guest, we have Bob Rose, former Chief Credit Officer of Brookline Bancorp. Today, Bob serves as a mentor, coach, and the executive banking officer for the company. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, Darryl. Pleasure to be here.
So, Bob, you've been around in the industry long enough to have seen a couple of economic cycles. What do you predict is going to happen in the future?
Well, what's kind of funny, Darryl, is I just kept putting one foot in front of the other for what turned out to be 47 years, almost 47 years. And I've reflected back on that relative to what you just asked me. There have been 6 or 7 recessions over that time period, either measured by my sort of experiences and looking at a government website to see what was official. They were all very different. They all had varying impacts on people. And it was very dependent on your circumstance, your company's circumstance. And some of them, frankly, were just nothing, it is hard to predict. I am skewing at present a little bit to the yes, that we might have a recession. And 2 weeks ago, I might not have been skewing in that direction at all. But what has happened in the last 2 weeks has been the introduction of a new word to the news, and that is layoffs. We're seeing and hearing a lot of that in the last couple of weeks. They seem to be coming first out of the high-tech industry, and people say, oh, that won't bother us, that's out in the West Coast. No, it isn't. Boston is a very technology-driven community, and a lot of those same companies have employees and offices here. I also heard the other day that Ford is starting to lay some people off, plain old manufacturing business. But ultimately, it comes down to people losing their jobs and then not being able to pay their bills, chiefly their credit cards, then their car loans, then their home mortgages. So I think there may be a little something headed our way. I don't dare say how severe. Boston's not been a boom and bust community.
Bob, if we're potentially heading into a recession, what would you recommend that business owners do to prepare for a downturn?
Well, I tell them to stop fretting and wringing their hands needlessly, but I'd say the best thing they could do would be to run a little rough plan, a little stress test, if you will, and focus on your cash. Think of your profits, think of your capital. Those are your kind of sources of cash. And think about, could you actually get money out of them when you needed it? And could something going on in your revenues, your expenses, or the composition of your capital that might hurt you? So plan out what you might do to get cash. And there is a huge difference between what you think something is worth or what your accounting value says something is worth versus actual money that you get when you need it. So I'd say the best thing you could do is begin to embrace the concept that maybe something happens and just sketch out roughly how you might address it so that if it does happen, you're not left high and dry. And make sure you talk it over with the family and your management team, and perhaps even your banker can help you with some liquidity in assets that you can't get your hands on quickly.
Great. I think that's sage advice for business owners. I kind of go back to my days as a young lender, and it was always cash is king, and cash is what gets you through the tough times. When you look around the Boston skyline these days, and the surrounding communities, we're still seeing a lot of construction. There seem to be office buildings going up and apartment buildings going up. What's your view of the real estate markets today?
Well, yeah, residential has been happening for a long time, but it's probably okay. All the studies that get published about residential building in Greater Boston, in Massachusetts, is that we have a perennial shortage of all types of housing. So that's probably okay, but hold that thought for a second. Mixed use, it depends on the location. It depends what the mix is, but generally okay. Retail is probably okay, depending on what you're doing and where. I always like to think that most things inside the 128 belt can be converted into something else, and the demand is strong enough for a limited resource called a building lot that you could change something around. The two things that I would worry a little bit about or be concerned about would be lab space and office space. I think people are slowing down the lab conversions, the lab building, and maybe we're a little overbuilt in some locations and maybe still a little underbuilt in others. It really depends on where you are. But lab people do like to cluster amidst other lab people. So to have a lab site off in the woods someplace is very different from having lab space in Kendall Square, obviously. Office is the real conundrum in my mind, and it was and it still is. It hasn't resolved. And the excess capacity that's been created by working from home has been reabsorbed in different places in Massachusetts at different rates. But I think the thing that'll be, the musical chair or the person with no place to sit when the music stops might be what I used to call the financial district, downtown. At least that's what they called it 47 years ago. Maybe they've got a new name for it now, but that is slowly coming back, but much slower than other things. It's still very empty on Mondays and Fridays. The street level businesses suffer a little bit. And I think those are going to be, some of them are going to be converted to apartments. So sort of circle back to the apartment comment, you could get a little too much apartment versus where it's needed, but office is something that we need to keep our eye on.
Great. I think that's really helpful. And I think pretty much what I think as well. I think that the real estate market is something we need to keep an eye on, and hopefully it's not really problematic. So, Bob, you're starting to ease your way into retirement. What do you have on the bucket list?
Well, if I make up a list and I don't do it, I'll feel bad. So let's not think of it as a list per se. I have a lot of interests that keep me busy, but if I had to reduce it to some places, I really want to go to Detroit. I really want to go to Buffalo, New York. Those places fascinate me as economic powerhouses that have had their ups and downs, but they are filled with architectural wonders and beautiful public places due to their past wealth. And there's just that great Motown sound, Darryl, that you can't get anyplace else, right? Other places, I love Quebec City. I love Montreal. I really like the Maritimes. And of course, London. If you don't understand, you can't understand America if you don't look around London a little bit. So those might be the places you'd find me down the road.
Well, those all sound exciting, and some of them maybe a little adventurous, but that sounds good. I hope you enjoy when you get around to all these places.
I'll send you a postcard.
Please do. All right, Bob, thank you for joining us on Darryl and Company.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And thanks to you all for watching Darryl and Company.